How are we doing? Why do I never have this light set ready for when I go live? There we go. Let me just see. Oh, wait. I can't seem to... There? No, that's fine. Hello, folks. You're all very welcome to another evening of Livestream with me, John D. Ruddy. For anyone who is watching this back later, you can access these live streams through Patreon by supporting me on Patreon. So it's a strange time we're living in, folks. It's hard to know where we're at the moment with COVID, with the many protests erupting all over the world. It's quite bizarre. And I mean, I had this live stream scheduled for yesterday evening, but then as it turned out, there was the Blackout Tuesday. So in solidarity with that, I postponed it to this evening. But it's quite... I'm lost for words. I actually am. I'm lost for words. But it's been quite upsetting, to say the very least. I mean, the COVID stuff still is. The COVID stuff is difficult, is stressful, and the way that different people are dealing with it is difficult, but at the same time, it's kind of manageable. But with all of these protests erupting for justice for George Floyd, for civil rights, and what is very upsetting about all of it is the amount of people who insist on explaining why people shouldn't be protesting, or why people, like, I mean, you've got people who are sitting there going, oh, well, you shouldn't be looting, and the looters should be, and I just find that there's a lot of, shall I say, bad faith arguments being made by people to discredit these protests, that the focus is on the looting and not on the protests. And, like, not obviously, I'm not condoning looting, but don't let it take away from the issue at hand. And I think some people, not everybody, but some people would prefer if people focus on the looting instead of focusing on the point at hand. And that point at hand seems to be that African Americans experience racism. I mean, like, it's more than that, but the institutionalized racism, and I don't claim to be any expert in this. I know as much as I know from listening to people, from the history that I have studied myself. I don't claim to be an expert on how people have experienced the world, but I do trust, when so many people, when it's a thing, that there comes a time when a parent has to take their child aside and talk to them and explain to them that there's this thing out there called racism, and when it comes to dealing with police, with law enforcement, you have to be super careful. This is what you say, this is how you say it. Otherwise, they might make a mistake and shoot you, or things can escalate and you can end up getting arrested. I think getting arrested is the better case scenario. But when that is normal, when that is just a thing, I was listening to Mark Bernardin, who is one half of the Fat Man Beyond podcast with him and Kevin Smith, and Mark Bernardin put it in a way of that he's aware of racism and aware of the thing with police and whatnot. He's aware of that in the same way as he's aware of gravity, in that you're not going around constantly thinking about gravity, but gravity affects the things that you do. And if I trip, I'm going to fall because of gravity. And in the same way, as it's not constantly on your mind, but it is a factor that one must take into account. And him, as a black man who seemingly fits the profile of someone who looks dodgy, like all of the fact that he's a writer, a podcaster, all of that just goes by the wayside because a policeman or police officer looks at him and thinks, "Oh, what's that black person doing over there?" And that's putting it lightly. It's upsetting. What I find very upsetting is people trying to make arguments for why this is. Where you get people saying, well, statistically speaking, black people are more likely to commit crimes. There are more black people in prisons. So therefore a police officer, it makes sense that a police officer suspects a black person more. But first of all, a police officer making a judgment based on based on what other black people have done and applying it to this one person, like that's racism. When I worked as a youth worker, there was an exercise that I would do with teenagers where I would split them all up into groups, and I would get them to write down all of the words, all of the stereotypes that they could think of. And they would write, and I would really let them go for it. I would really I would really give them free rein. Whatever they wanted to write, they could write. If you're thinking, oh, should I write that? Write that. That's the kind of stuff that I want to see. If it's offensive, put it down. I want to see that. Getting and the teenagers have great fun. this liberation of being able to write whatever they want on this piece of paper, and they come up with this huge big list of, this is what this group is known for. This group is known for being like that. This group is known for being like that, and just all of these stereotypes. And then at the very end of the exercise, I take up all the pieces of paper, and they're all kind of giddyishly proud of the long lists that they have come up with, and I just straight up tear up the whole thing. And the point of that exercise isn't so much that stereotypes don't exist. It is that stereotypes, it's important to be aware of stereotypes, because stereotypes go into racism, go into sectarianism, go into, all of these different things. And that's because our brain tries to make sense of the world as fast as it possibly can. Our brain is constantly, our brain, the reason why our species has survived and evolved to survive in this way is that we are really good at recognizing patterns. We can recognize, okay, so the leaf, the plant with this type of leaf will kill me. The plant with this type of leaf is edible, and I will eat that one. Because I saw so-and-so die from eating that one, so I'm not going to do that, and I'm going to tell everybody else not to eat that one either. And that's all well and good, and that has helped us survive. And, we have learned so many things from noticing these patterns, from recognizing cause and effect. If I do that, this is what happened before, I can do that again. It's the basis of science. However, our brain isn't always necessarily scientific. Our brain is constantly trying to make sense of the world as quickly as possible, because as far as the brain's concerned, it's life and death. It's, I need to understand that right away. And that is why we have these stereotypes from birth, from the word go. We're absorbing patterns. We are absorbing things. Some patterns we are true patterns. Some, like for example, babies in utero recognize recognize their own mother's tone of voice, but even at that, they also recognize their own native language, which I found fascinating. Where they did this experiment where newborn babies and played them recordings of different languages, and they always responded more positively towards their native language. And this is a newborn, and that's because they've been listening to their mother or listening to other people around the belly speaking. And it's not the words, it's the intonation, it's the musicality. Each language has or even each dialect of a language has its own musicality, and so they will pick up on that. And in the same way as they pick up on that, they pick up on everything that is presented to them, and they absorb every pattern that they see, and they make sense of that. So if they're watching TV, and if all they see on TV is female nurses and male builders, then they're going to think, okay, so all nurses are female and all builders are male. And there's a reason why they're the two stereotypes that I went for first, because they are ones that are so deeply ingrained of gendered jobs. Now, some would argue that builders, for example, men are more suited for construction work because they're physically stronger and whatnot. But that doesn't mean that a woman can't do it in that way. Yes, physicality in that regard gives men an advantage, but it doesn't mean that women can't do the job. But these stereotypes, these patterns are picked up on all the time and from the word go. And I need to sneeze. Chew live. And the point that I always bring up when I've done that exercise with teenagers where they're writing out the lists is that we can't stop our brains from coming up with stereotypes. That's what our brain does. Our brain tries to make sense of the world as quickly as possible, and we can't stop it from doing that. But what we can do is we can be aware of when our brain is doing that. We can be aware of, is my brain making that judgment based on what it knows or based on what it thinks it knows? If you know what I mean. So, if you're making a judgment based on a person, based on are you making that judgment based on what you know about that specific person, or are you basing it on what you know about that what that person looks like? What kind of clothes does that person wear? What color is their skin? What do they have an accent? Like, there's all sorts of different things like that, and we are still so susceptible to that in everything that we see, everything that we do. There is coding is a huge thing, and I'm not talking writing in code. I am talking about in films and TV shows in particular. I mean, it is in other media, but like film and TV as an example, coding is when a character just as a has a certain type of features just so that the audience can understand it very quickly. And what that means, to give you an example, quite often throughout the 20th century, of course, I mean, the majority of cinema is from the 20th century, but for years it was banned from having gay people in films or having any kind of gay activity or anything indicating that gay people exist in films. And at the same time, particularly in the 1950s, there was a huge push against gay people. And because of this, because of this, you have villains that quite often would have camp or foppish coding, gay coding or queer coding, where the character isn't necessarily gay. Like, it's not in the text. Like, whoever wrote it didn't say, oh, and this character is gay. But it's in the coding of the character where the way that they act, So what that meant was, you will if you think of a dastardly villain who who's like, if you think of that overly camp kind of character, it can sometimes come across as villainous or very obvious. I mean, I know as an actor, I really enjoy playing camp villains. They're a lot of fun. But where does that come from? Like, the idea of the camp villain, and why are villains so often camp? And that is part of it, where it was an ingrained thing to essentially, either on purpose or otherwise, to portray gay people as sinister, to portray gay people as sneaky. And so you often had villains. Sneaky is actually a particular one where, you would have someone who was untrustworthy. And quite often, the way that they would talk, or the way that they would act, or the way that they would hold themselves would be coded as gay, where the audience sees it. They're not necessarily thinking, "Oh, that character's gay," but they're like, there's something not right about that character. There's something a bit different about that character, and that's what that is. For a ton of stuff, a ton of videos about coding, I would point you towards Rowan Ellis, who does some fantastic LGBTQ plus videos, and I'm pretty sure she does. She does do a couple of videos. One of my favorite ones actually was how Carol Danvers in Captain Marvel is coded as gay, and she gets super excited about that. It's one of my favorite videos of hers. Also, Lindsay Ellis, another Ellis. Lindsay Ellis does some fantastic work on coding using the film Bright, the Netflix film, where you have orcs and elves and fantasy creatures living in LA, and how the coding of that works. Like, actually, if you just to use an example, speaking of fantasy, coding in Lord of the Rings, for example, at least take the film versions, the Peter Jackson adaptations of Lord of the Rings. Part of the coding is in the way characters speak and the way hobbits, for example, more often than not, a lot of the hobbit characters would speak in like West Country accents, so the likes of Mary Brandybuck and Samwise Gamgee speak with West Country accents, and Pippin speaks with a Scottish accent, but Frodo speaks with a much more upper class accent, and that is to show that him, and indeed Bilbo, are upper class within that world, and that is something that works subconsciously. You don't think about it, but that's what that communicates, that we see Frodo is upper class in comparison to Samwise Gamgee, who's speaking in a West Country accent. And even then, when like most of the all of the elves, they all speak in some form of RP English accent, and do the Rohirrim do that as well? To the men? Yeah, the Rohirrim as well speak. Although if you listen carefully, they tried something different with the Rohirrim, where they spoke with hard R's. You can hear it still in some of Eowyn's dialogue, where they had no warning. Whatever it is, I can't think of the line, but you can hear some of the hard R's, but it ended up sounding too American and it sounded strange. So for the most part, when they were re-recording all the dialogue, they re-recorded it without the hard R's, but some of it still snuck in. But then, of course, the all of the orcs, whenever the orcs speak, they speak in Cockney accents. So you hear that, and you're thinking lower class, but rough and bruff, because these are orcs. So all the orcs have Cockney accents. Of course, that is playing on your stereotypes, because obviously not everyone who speaks with a Cockney accent is going to be a big rough orc. It's actually quite insulting if you think about it. But that's what coding does. And that is how coding works, and that's only in accent. That's one layer of coding. You've got other layers of coding of just even the how they dress, what they dress, because even though even though that's a complete fantasy land, the certain there's certain aspects of characters which can be which, if you actually stop and think about it, you're trying to work out, was this coding deliberate? Take goblins in and I've noticed this in a couple of things, and I could be reading into it, but I mean, that's the thing. Things are there to be read into. But the coding of goblins in Harry Potter. So goblins are these little mistrusty creatures with big long noses who are very greedy, and they control all of the money. And you're trying to, one could wonder, is that a Jewish coding? Like, it could be completely subconscious, but it's there. In the same way, I've been watching Star Wars: The Clone Wars. There's a ton of coding in that, particularly with accents. But something, again, it's probably not deliberate, but it's there. The Munes, who are again in charge of the banks, have facial features which one could argue is stereotypically Jewish, and they're in charge of the banks. Yeah, so it's a grand old world out there, and yeah. So going back to, like, why am I talking about this? This is what I'm talking about, that we are so susceptible to these things, to stereotypes, that sometimes when we're challenged with something that we don't see, when we are challenged with, there's a lot of people, but there's a lot of white people who don't recognize their position of privilege. And here he goes talking about white privilege. But white privilege is a real thing, and white privilege is, it's not that you're guaranteed a good life because you're white. That's not what it is. It means that you being white isn't an obstacle, isn't an extra thing for you to overcome, and more often than not, to constantly have to overcome. I mean, Barack Obama became president of the United States, and even while he was president of the United States, he was still having to overcome the fact that he was mixed race. Even the fact that he is mixed race, and not just African American, but that was people's perception. They're like, oh, he's a black president. And I mean, I'm not taking away from the fact that, yes, he was absolutely black president, but he was a person of color. But his mother was white, and yet he is black. It's that was it, One Drop, which was a decision made, I think, in the southern states or something to that effect, where it was decided about bloodlines of, if there was one drop of black blood, that you were considered black. And it's very upsetting in this day and age that there are still so many people out there who can't come to terms with the fact that the United States in particular, but it's not just the United States, but the United States is a massive example of this. The United States is built on a foundation of slavery. It is. It's, the founding fathers were slaveholders. The first, uh, at least I'd say maybe about 10, at least 10 presidents of the United States were slave owners. They owned, like some of them owned, like George Washington owned, I think, well over 200 slaves. I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but they owned people. And, the White House, the Congress building, they were built by slaves. And it's not like it's done. It's done. But the thing is, because you've got some people who will take that and say, well, it's done. Let's all move on from that. And then, yeah, that's fair. But there's a difference between saying it's done, let's forget about it and move on, and it's done, so let's understand what implication that has for people today. Because there's a brilliant video. Well, there's a couple of videos actually. ContraPoints. Natalie Wynn does an excellent video about zoning rights and whether or not racism affects today, or Jim Crow laws affect today. And she essentially points out that so many of and who else does one? Knowing Better as well. Excellent video. I think related to a similar thing, where it's all about zoning and how different areas of cities, essentially like black and white neighborhoods, if you look at where those zones are, they correspond with older Jim Crow segregation time things. So, I mean, technically segregation is over, but segregation is still part of the living conditions, of the infrastructure of so many places in the United States. You've got black neighborhoods, you got white neighborhoods, you got Hispanic neighborhoods. There are these racial lines. Like, I mean, obviously it's not terrible everywhere. I mean, and thankfully there are exceptions, and thankfully there are loads of integrated places. But the fact remains that there are still places out there which are divided. And I get very frustrated. So I made a couple of memes, and because I was going through Twitter, and I was reading a whole pile of very frustrating comments by bad faith arguments, particularly around George Floyd, and like people trying to discredit, oh, why are we marching for him? What did, he must have done something wrong. The media doesn't show when he's done something wrong. And it's like, you trying to discredit this one person, like, and you get loads of people as well who are like, oh no, like, I mean, he was a scumbag cop who put his knee on his neck for too long. But people they're just edging towards the thing of, well, I mean, he didn't deserve to die, but maybe he did deserve, to be treated roughly, to be, like, it just gets very squirrely. It gets very. So I made a couple of memes, and I just find that there's a lot of hypocrisy amongst a lot of, shall we call, hardcore American patriots. who praise the founding fathers, who think that the Revolutionary War, these folks, they fought against tyranny. They were being downtrodden by the British, and they rose up and they stood and they fought against tyranny. And they're constantly going back to tyranny when they're talking about the Second Amendment, and they should be able to hold on to their guns because of tyranny, and just in case the government comes for you. Well, what if the government is coming for some people? I mean, Donald Trump has just enacted that the military will be called in. It's hard to predict what Trump is going to do or what Trump is going to demand. But what if that tyranny hasn't come for you, but they've come for somebody else? Are you standing by them going for that other person, or what's going on there? So I have a picture of the Boston Massacre. I don't know, is this going to be back to front for you or the right way around? But they don't show you what they were doing. They don't show you what they were doing wrong before. Fake news, Boston Massacre. And interestingly enough, apparently, according to some reports, the reports of the Boston Massacre were possibly mildly exaggerated by the revolutionaries. If we're looking to muddy the water even more, there are some who would suggest that was it Paul Revere and John Hancock? It was someone like that who they were in charge of I think it was Paul Revere, maybe. That, like that illustration, for example, I mean that is arguably a very one-sided view of what happened, but who's to know? They didn't. This is the thing. They didn't have smartphones then. They weren't recording everything then. That's the difference. And somebody pointed this out as well. It's not that racism in the United States has gotten worse. It's that there's more people recording the instances of it. And that's one of the big differences. Here's a picture. Black guy threatening authorities. # all lives matter. Yeah, because authority needs to be obeyed at all times. Did they even read the British Constitution? I mean, they're all subjects of Britain. Why are they fighting against the British? Oh yeah. The founding fathers are dividing you. They're creating this violence, as I've heard many people refer to the Democrats. Oh, they're stirring up all of this violence. They're stirring up all of this unrest. Maybe is it the situation? That's like there's no smoke without fire. Yeah, sometimes a protest or a movement needs a push in order for people to get to that point, to storm the Bastille, shall we say. But it doesn't come from nowhere. People don't just go, hey, let's revolt. People have a foot on their face when they choose to revolt. And sometimes it takes pointing out the boot, because sometimes people are so blindsided by distractions in the world, by their own problems, that they don't see the boot on their face. Ireland, as a prime example, in 1916, when the leaders of the Easter Rising, when Patrick Pearse and James Connolly and everybody else went out and captured, they went in with rifles and captured the GPO and the various other buildings around Dublin and a couple of other places dotted around Ireland, but in Dublin. And Pierce came out and read the Proclamation of Independence, Irish men and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generations from which she receives her old tradition of nationhood, Ireland through us summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. People on the street looking on. I mean, this was Easter Monday. Half the city had cleared out to Ferryhouse for the Irish Grand National. But people were wandering down what was Sackville Street, walking past the GPO, and these boys out reading this thing. We declare the rights of the ownership of Ireland to the. We declare. Oh, what is it? We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland, and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies to be sovereign and indivisible, etc., etc. That people walking past were sitting there going, what's all this about? Why are you going in there and shooting and capturing buildings, and like, what's this all about? Because a lot of people in Ireland were, well, some people in Ireland were happy with the status quo. Other people didn't quite really notice the status quo. And Ireland at this point was after decades of emigration. So many of the poor and downtrodden had left. They'd either starved to death or they had left. So by the time you get to the 1910s, you got so many people who, like Ireland's population had been so squeezed, that, but you had so many people who were just like, well, this is the status quo. And not only that, but if you keep the people stupid, if you don't educate them properly, although ironically, some would argue that the British education system in United Kingdom Ireland was better than some of the education system that followed in early independent Ireland, but that's a story for another day. Yeah. So it wasn't until the British then showed up and demolished Dublin, like took out 18-pounder howitzer guns, the same guns that they were firing over at the Somme, or getting ready to fire at the Somme at that point. Those same 18-pounder howitzer guns, they pointed at the buildings in Dublin, and they demolished sections of Dublin in order to crush this rebellion. And not only to crush the rebellion, but to crush future rebellions. You know, to show what happens when you rebel against the British. That's what that was. And of course, what's his name? General Sir John Maxwell. He made the massive mistake of, he ended up executing, well, ultimately was it 14 of the leaders were executed. Well, there's 16 if you include Thomas Kent and, what do you call him? Roger Casement. But there were a lot of them. But they were all executed within, like, the first day of execution of Patrick Pearse, Thomas Clark, and Thomas McDonough. So they surrendered on the Saturday, and the first executions took place the following Tuesday, I think. Like, that's how quick it was. And it was all done in secret. And so there were just rumors going around going, are they killing? They're executing these guys. And it took that for many Irish people to see how they were being oppressed, and to see how oppressive the British were, and that they were making the decisions and not us. And, you know, and so sometimes it takes some people to step up, because the American Revolution was similar, where you had tons of British loyalists who were loyal to Britain, of course. That's what British loyalists mean, John. But they were sitting there going, "What are these revolutionary guys doing? What are they talking about?" And yet nowadays, American patriots are all like, "Yay, the founding fathers!" And nowadays, Irish people are like, "Yay, the Easter Rising!" But at the time, people were questioning it. People were going, "Do we really need to do this?" And so, history is 2020, as they say, and people looking back at this, people looking back at now, in the same way as you've got loads of people quoting Martin Luther King going, "Oh, well, look, Martin Luther King needed to be, he preached peace." It's like, yeah, but I mean, he was also assassinated. He was all like, yeah, like Martin Luther King was a great, amazing leader, but the civil rights movement wasn't entirely peaceful. Like, there were riots. Was it the summer of 1964? Like, there were riots. There were people who were just at their wits' end, going, "What is going on here?" And like, you connect the dots. It's upsetting, and like, and it's and I say this from a position of white male privilege, because if I want to, I can switch off from this. If I want to, I can choose to turn my back on this. If I want to, I can say, I'm just not going to look at Instagram today. Like, there's a corner of me kind of flicking through Instagram these days going, "Oh, another image of protest, another image." And the fact that if I really wanted to, I can switch it off and not have to worry about it. I mean, not only am I white, I live in Ireland. I live in a predominantly white country on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. So I'm able to shut it out. And some people are like, "Well, why are you even talking about this?" It's like, because I care about the world, because I care about, and yes, there are other injustices happening in other places. Absolutely. Absolutely. But this is a country, and I talk about the United States, this is a country that hasn't fully come to terms with their history of slavery. That's what this is down to. Partially down to. I mean, there are so many other things, but until you can properly examine what the country was built on, without just going, yeah, it's done, let's move forward. Meanwhile, I'm going to go and put on a Confederate jacket and go and make believe that we're in the middle of a battle, at a battle reenactment, a Civil War reenactment, and I can socially and I can carry my Confederate flag in a socially acceptable way because we're recreating history. Okay, that was a cheap shot. This is not to take away from battle reenactors. There is an importance to that. There's a great heritage, and it's great to be able to see, have some regard of what a battle of those times looks like. But I would suggest that because there are loads of people out there who love their Confederate flag. I don't get how the Confederate flag is still a thing. I don't get how people can still so strongly stand by the Confederate flag. Like, it is a flag of, and not only that, but most people don't even use the proper Confederate flag. This is what really like. Not only are you using a Confederate flag, you're using an inaccurate Confederate flag. Like if your flag is rectangular and has the cross in the middle, the X in the middle, that's inaccurate. That flag was not used during the Civil War. The closest to that, it was square, and yeah, but that's another thing. But I just can't believe that because not only that, but the is it the flag of Georgia is essentially the stars and bars, which is the older Confederate flag. Those symbols are still there, and I just can't understand how like Germany has actually banned, like Nazi paraphernalia is banned. You're not allowed to, like, it is illegal to fly a Nazi flag. It's Nazi imagery is so illegal that the band Kiss have a different logo in Germany because the SS on the Kiss logo looks too similar to the SS logo of the Nazi regime. That's how serious it is. But then you'd have some people who would argue that, oh well, that's taken away our freedom. We should have the freedom to fly our flag. I mean, yeah, but it would also suggest that you want to fly a Confederate flag. It's a flag of a failed state. Like, it's as many a Trump voter would say, you lost, get over it. You lost, get over it. And not you, the people 150 or however long ago it is now, more than that. By the way, for anyone who can hear, I don't know whether or not you can hear, my darling little dog is just going slightly insane outside. He's fine. He's just being dramatic because he can't get in the kitchen door at the moment. Yeah, I don't know if you can hear him. You probably can because he's being wonderfully dramatic. He's fine. He's fine. Don't worry about him. But yeah, so here is another image. Bunch of thugs and their fife music. Don't forget to stand by your local law enforcement. And last week a half. But yeah, and like a lot of these quotes that I have from this are direct quotes from tweets that I saw. I essentially went out and looked up hashtag Trump victory 2020 and looked at what people had to say. And here's one. Why would you riot? Riot peacefully. Don't destroy people's livelihoods. Boston Tea Party. People were supposed to make money from that tea. What's the East India Company going to do? Like, you've just damaged their business. Poor East India Company. Hashtag corporations. Why are you so angry with tyranny? Better men built this country. One could argue the same with Ireland. Most of the best buildings in Dublin were built by the British. No, I take that back. They weren't built by the British. They were built by the Irish. But like, it was British architecture that. But it's a controversial issue. I'll park that. The British government will be designating the Continental Army as a terrorist organization. These guys going around with their guns, opening fire on law enforcement. And look at these Americans throwing temper tantrums. throwing their tea out of the ship. George Washington has done nothing for 40 years. Now he's going to fix this. That was based on something I saw about Joe Biden. Not that I'm a Biden supporter, but anything better than Trump. Oh, God, I don't envy you folks with your choices there. But yeah, that's some of the things, some of my thoughts. And I think the whole thing of COVID-19 has just put the lid on the pressure cooker. I think that's what it's done. You know, this has been boiling. It's never not been boiling. You know, sometimes the, like, while Obama was in office, maybe it was dialed down a bit, but it's never been off the boil. It's never been off the heat. And I think with Trump, the heat was turned up, and with COVID, the lid was put on. That's what's happened, you know. And George Floyd getting murdered, you know, it's a catalyst. That's not the I mean, obviously it is a problem. It's a massive problem, but that's not the thing. Like, there's so many people who are trying to discredit that one thing, in the hope that if they discredit that one thing, then the entire the entire cause will be gone. It's like, the cause isn't gone. The cause, like, it's just a symptom. I will remove the cause, but not the symptom. Yeah. I don't envy you folks. I just need to check something. Yeah. That says it all, really, doesn't it? It says it all. It says it all. Right. This has been the May, even though it's the start of June, but this has been the live stream for May. If you want to take part in these and be here live chatting with me through this all, you can do so by supporting me on Patreon, patreon.com/John D. Ruddy. You can watch my videos on YouTube. You can go and follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I have a new podcast. I have a new podcast called Where Many Have Gone Before. It's available on Spotify and Apple. It's all about me watching Star Trek for the very first time. For a bit of positivity, if you want a complete distraction from all of this. But if you can successfully distract yourself from this, then you're in a position of privilege. I can successfully distract myself from this. I can switch off from this. There are people out there who cannot switch off from this because they cannot change the color of their skin. If you can switch off from this, you're lucky That's all I've got to say. Hopefully we'll have a bit of positivity for the next live stream. But I don't think this was going to be a positive one. I'm working on videos, just to let you know. But there you go. Peace.